Well, there was a little unfinished business from the last uh, part one of this presentation. A few rough edges that I'd like to smooth off. I talked about the 6 stages of the growth of the Greek state, uh, starting with its 1830 original version and then the various territories that were added over the years until 1947. Um, Phil, with his sharp eye, noticed that there's a little territory here that's red in the midst of this pink territory. This is Thessaly and part of Epirus that was acquired by Greece in 1881. And what is this little territory? This is a town called Elassona. For all the research I did, I was not able to find out exactly why this town was set aside and kept under Turkish control in the midst of the rest of this territory that all was taken over by Greece. I can tell you that it's a sort of a strategic location. It's more or less at the foot of Mount Olympus, and it's in a pass which leads from the plains of Thessaly into the mountains of Macedonia. So a strategic location. The circumstances under which this took place were, this was a sort of a delayed outcome of the war between Russia and Turkey, the Russo-Turkish War, which came to an end about 1876 and was originally ended with a treaty called the Treaty of San Stefano, which was mostly dictated by the Russians. The Russians were victorious in this war, and they came up with a treaty that created a very large state of Bulgaria. Bulgaria was a sort of client state of the Russians, and in the original Treaty of San Stefano, almost all of Macedonia, this whole area, was given to Bulgaria. So it was very pleasing to the Bulgarians. But the rest of the European powers took exception to this. And they had enough influence at the time to be able to undo this settlement. There was a Congress held in Berlin, and the Treaty of Berlin in 1878 revised the settlement that had been originally imposed by Russia. There was still a state of Bulgaria, but much smaller. Most of Macedonia remained within Turkey, and some Turkish territory was given to Greece. The Greeks were asked to make proposals about what territory should be added, and the Turks were then asked to agree. And naturally, they couldn't agree on the territorial settlement, the boundary lines. So Great Britain stepped in and mediated between the two. And what they came up with was this settlement where they established a boundary between Thessaly and what remained in Turkey, up in Macedonia and most of Epirus, plus this town of Elassona. So that's the answer, as well as I can make it out at this point. I wanted to make another comment or two about this cover. In the course of discussing the Turkish period, I showed this cover, which was franked with a stamp of the Austrian offices in Turkey, canceled in Rhodes. I looked to find out which of the European powers had postal offices in the Dodecanese in Rhodes, and it turns out there were only two, Austria and France. There were altogether 6 major European powers that had postal services in the Turkish Empire. Great Britain, France, Germany, Austria, Italy, and Russia. And they had different numbers of offices. The British had only five cities in which they had postal services. Italy had 9, France had 24, Russia had 20, Germany had 8, and Austria had 37. There were other countries that had offices. Those were primarily only in Constantinople. They didn't have services scattered around in the different cities. There were some issues of stamps for a Romanian as well as a Polish postal service in Constantinople.
May I ask, what is the thinking behind having your own postal service in someone else's country?
The Turkish postal service was not very effective, especially when it came to any overseas arrangements. You could send letters using the Turkish postal service, but many business people and foreign diplomats and travelers preferred to use the postal service of one of the European powers, which were generally more efficient. Um, the system was called, let's see, the term is not concession.
Capitulation.
Capitulation. Thank you, Phil. It momentarily escaped my mind. System of capitulations, um, which was ended, by the way, when the Ottoman Empire came to an end and the Turkish Republic started. All of the European postal services stopped functioning basically after World War I. I believe that French were the last to leave in the early 1920s. There was a question, our Greek friend Kostas asked me where these stamps were produced. And these were the ones issued by the Free State of Ikaria at the end of 1912. The answer is they were produced in Athens. They're produced by lithography at a company called Stangl Lithographic Works. And they saw very, very little use. The islanders wanted to be incorporated into Greece, and so they started to use the Greek stamps overprinted for the new territory, starting in January of 1913. So while I have a canceled example of these, I don't have one on cover. And I think covers are extremely rare. I don't recall ever having seen one offered in an auction, but they probably exist as philatelic items. And one more review from last time. I want to give you a translation of the postmark here. This was first used on Turkish stamps, and the whole idea here seems to be to advertise Greek control of the island. We have here the coat of arms of Greece and headquarters of Greek Kastellorizo. We have Greek stamps overprinted, Kastellorizo, and the translation is Provisional Greek Control Commission of Kastellorizo. These letters here say Post Office Department, 1913. So moving on, I showed you these last time. These were the first Italian issues, ordinary Italian stamps overprinted for use in the Aegean Islands, where the postal rates were different. So they sold for less than face value, but only in the islands. The Italians then overprinted their stamps for each of the islands in their control at the time, and that would have been 13 different islands received these overprints. My original list of all the Dodecanese islands had 15 names. The 14 that had been recognized by Turkey, plus Castellorizo, which was not part of the original group, but was incorporated into the Dodecanese later. These were issued in 3 stages. The first islands issues in 1912 were these 2, 5, 10, 15, 25, and 40 centesimi, and then there was a change in the local postal rate. So they issued a 20. First, they took the 15 centesimi stamp and overprinted it 20, and then they issued a new Italian stamp with the island name. And finally, these were further issues that came later, another 15 and another 20. Apparently, they ran low on stocks of these stamps, so they took some more Italian stamps and overprinted them. A different 15 and a 20, which differs from the first one only by being watermarked. This one is unwatermarked and this is watermarked. This is the one thing you have to be careful of in acquiring these stamps. The 20 centesimi orange-brown stamps look identical and only differ in watermark, but there's a great difference in price. Some of the watermarked ones are quite expensive. You have to be sure you're getting the right stamp. Here's a postcard with Italian overprinted stamp from Kalymnos, and another one from Halki. These islands apparently are quite mountainous. Most of them have only a small area which is suitable for agriculture. Otherwise, they're quite hilly and rough. This is Simi, and this one's very close to the Turkish mainland. Those hills in the background would be the Turkish mainland. Castellorizo, or what the Italians call Castelrosso, was added to the group only by the Treaty of Sèvres in 1920. The Italians went ahead and incorporated it into the Italian Aegean Islands, and they produced these overprints. Here's the second set. I'm not sure why they decided to change the orientation of the overprint, but there they are. And then in 1923, on the second anniversary of acquiring the islands, they issued these stamps with a flag, Italian flag, the island, and showing its proximity to Asia Minor, Turkish mainland. I was fascinated to see how similar these stamps are to this French poster stamp. It's not a postage stamp, but a label, a military label issued in 1916 during the French occupation. You've got the flag and pretty much the same image of the mainland there on the stamps. So they must have thought that the design was a good idea and borrowed it. Okay, these are the first pictorial stamps issued for roads, 1929. The stamps, by the way, were valid throughout the islands, but they were labeled roads. The Italians issued over 380 stamps for the Italian Aegean Islands. Most of them didn't see too much use, but as in the earlier case of the Greeks, the Italians used the postal issues to celebrate and commemorate their control. The designs are traditional designs from the islands and mostly seem to be oriented to the history of the island as a location that figured in the Crusades. This would be a crusader soldier from centuries earlier. And here the high values also show what appears to be a Christian knight, crusader. The Knights of St. John, which were a military order established originally in Jerusalem, took up residence in Rhodes after the Islamic forces reconquered Jerusalem and drove out the Christians back in the 12th century.
These stamps are issued in the Italian fascist era, and the fasces on the stamps are very prominent, aren't they?
Very prominent. That is correct. Of course, the fasces are an ancient symbol going back to ancient Rome, where they symbolized governmental authority, but they were taken up and made into a symbol of Italian fascism in the 1920s and 30s. I call your attention to this particular stamp with what looks like a medieval ship with a flag with the 8-pointed cross, which became a symbol of Rhodes. Here it is. The 8-pointed star was the insignia of the Order of St. John, also known as the Knights Hospitaller, originally founded during the Crusades. The Knights moved to Rhodes in the early 1300s. When the Ottomans conquered the island in 1522, the Knights then moved to Malta, and this became known as the Maltese Cross, which we're familiar with as collectors from the cancellations used on the first British stamps, the penny black. Cancellation in red on this black stamp, and it also was done in black, but the black cancellation sometimes didn't show up against the black stamp, so the red was And later, of course, we know that they changed the color of the stamp to a reddish brown because the cancellations in black would then show up well on those colors. These pictorial stamps for roads were issued in two stages. There was a reissue, which is slightly different from the original in that it has a subscript down here at the bottom, and which doesn't exist on the original stamp. The stamp without its subscript is the more valuable set. There's quite a difference in price between the originals and the reprints. Something else to watch for if you're ever shopping for these stamps. Here's an example of the Rhodian stamp used on a postcard from the island of Kos, or Ku as the Italians call it. Postcard on the other side shows remains of an early Christian basilica on the island. Okay, so then the Italians began their series of commemorative stamps overprinted for the islands. And just as with the regular issues, they overprinted the names of each of the separate islands. All 14, including Kastellorizo, received these overprints. So it makes quite a few stamps to collect if you try to obtain the whole set. This is the Garibaldi issue. This happens to be the one overprinted for Castelrosso. Garibaldi set continued. Between 1930 and 1940, the stamps that were issued for the Dodecanese islands were again overprinted, not for individual islands, but for the island group as a whole, Italian Aegean islands, and in different colors from the stamps that were issued for metropolitan Italy. Another issue for the 700th anniversary of the death of St. Anthony of Padua, very nice engraved stamps, and issue for the Dante Alighieri Society with famous Italian authors. That's Machiavelli, Petrarch, and Dante and others. The high values show Leonardo and an image of his flying machine. I don't think this image is actually drawn from anything drawn by Leonardo, but it's an image of the device that he describes. He thought that it would be possible for people to fly if they could attach sufficiently large wings to their arms and then, flap them like a bird. This is the issue commemorating the flight of General Balbo. He flew from Italy to Chicago on the occasion of the Century of Progress exhibition, 1933 in Chicago. The exhibition was also commemorated on US stamps, but he was welcomed with great enthusiasm by the participants in that exposition. Had lunch with President Roosevelt. It was quite a big deal.
And these are pretty pricey stamps too.
Somewhat, yes. I think actually the ones without the Aegean Islands overprint are more expensive than these.
Okay.
It may be that they took most of them and overprinted them for the islands. Here's another somewhat expensive set. At least these ones overprinted for the islands are pretty expensive. It's about the most expensive of all these Italian sets. It's rather nicely designed, I think. There are austere designs typical of the the Italian designs of the fascist period. I have to admit, they made nice looking stamps, at least in my opinion. Military medals of valor, another issue overprinted for the Aegean Islands. These are the high values and the airmail portion of that set. This lower left stamp depicts Italian soldiers in some part of their holdings in Africa, ultramare, the overseas acquisitions in Somalia and Libya, which the Italians had recently acquired. The 2000th anniversary of the birth of Emperor Caesar Augustus. the airmail portion of that set. 600th anniversary of the death of Giotto, the painter. This is another stamp showing Leonardo da Vinci and a quotation from his writings. The man with his large wings pushing against the air will be able to subjugate and rise above her. This, by the way, is the first of the Italian issues which is actually imprinted Italian Aegean Islands on the stamp, as opposed to an overprint. And then the Graf Zeppelin stamps, another, I say, nicely designed stamp showing the airship over buildings and roads. Now, this is an interesting issue. This is hard to get. You rarely see these stamps offered. And I don't own this set. I'd love to, but this is an example of a philatelic cover with the full set for the 20th anniversary of the Italian control of the Dodecanese Islands. You notice this the shield on this one stamp with the crown on top and the letters F-E-R-T. I looked that up and, of course, naturally turned to Wikipedia, my friend, to find out what I could. And it turns out that there's controversy about what this actually stands for. It seems most likely to me that it's this phrase, fortitudo eius rhodium tenuit, which obviously applies specifically to roads. The Turks made a number of attempts to conquer Rhodes in particular, which was more or less the capital of the Dodecanese, and control of Rhodes would ensure the control of the rest of the islands. There was a siege by the Turks in 1315. This man, Count Amadeus V of Savoy, assisted the Knights of St. John against the Turkish siege. This phrase refers to his efforts on that occasion. His strength held or conquered Rhodes. There are other versions of the abbreviation, the FERT. One of them is Fides est regni tutela. I guess that's Latin. Faith is the protector of the kingdom. And there are others as well, but I fastened on this one as being the most likely on these stamps of the Dodecanese Islands. Another issue showing some of the symbolism of Rhodes. Here we have Romulus and Remus and the she-wolf, and the eight-pointed cross, again, a different form of it. This image, this would be, these are pillars at the opening of the harbor at Rhodes, and one of them shows this deer with very expansive antlers. An interesting image. This is the Dama Dama deer, also known as a European fallow deer. This is the an actual photograph of the harbor with this ancient fortress in the background and the two pillars. And this would be the location where originally in ancient times the famous Colossus of Rhodes stood. But now there are two Dama Dama deer, I suppose is the plural, right? Two Dama Dama deer on these pillars. Here it is again on some stamps, the express stamps. And we have here again the eight-pointed star. This is the actual animal. And you can see what extravagant antlers it has. It's native to this island, but also to other nearby parts of the Eastern Mediterranean region. Okay, that is all I want to do today. Next time, I'll continue with the final part involving the occupation of the Dodecanese by the Germans, and then the British, and finally by the Greeks.